also think what happens, and forgive me for just kind of going off, but I also think what happens is, there are really three parts of life. I mean, there's everything that leads up to the first thing you really want to do. Okay, so there's all of
Mhm.
that, and then there's the first thing you want to do. So that's part two, right?
Mhm.
And then you're sitting there and you're going, man, I'm so glad I'm getting to do what it is that I really want to do. In my case,
Mhm.
making records,
Mhm.
man. But then something else kind of happens, and what that is like the thing you really think that you didn't want to do all of a sudden becomes really appealing. And it's like you kind of have these moments, and I don't think it's quantifiable as a midlife crisis or any of that kind of crap. But I think what does happen is you do something long enough where you say to yourself, I'm no longer inventing anything new in my life. I'm not creating an opportunity for change. I'm not experiencing the broader, you get in that lane, and maybe you do really well. Maybe you're really blessed. Maybe you're really lucky. Maybe these things, the things that you wanted to do from the time you were a kid, all of a sudden really become accessible, available, and your normal way of life. And
Sure.
then all of a sudden, it starts occurring to you that, this is yet another version of something I've been doing for many, many years now. And you start kind of looking, laterally instead of forward. And you're like, why is it that I really thought that I hated X or Y? That maybe is a maturation process where you're actually sitting there and saying to yourself, the world is a big place. It is a really big place.
Mhm.
So I never thought, that I would have an affinity to be enjoying or successful at anything other than music. I mean, it just didn't occur to me. And I mean, I know where this is leading. I got an
Yeah.
opportunity at a particularly um, stressful moment, more than a moment, a couple of years. Music industry was changing remarkably. The services that somebody like myself provided, a little bit of tail end of somebody's career, a little bit of the business shifting remarkably. Budgets had changed, uh, all of that meaning I was making incredibly less money than I would have been making at a different time in the industry.
I'm so
And
glad that you're talking about this because this was something I really wanted to talk to you about, which is adaptation and second, third, fourth acts.
yeah, yeah, and that's
Adaptation,
and that's
resilience.
that's spot
So
on. I mean, I said it
go
happened
ahead.
3 bits or whatever. I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah.
And I had some friends and some associates who were involved in Wall Street and said to me, because of whatever they thought I would do well in that environment, math was the thing I ran as far as I could from. I was a creative. I was not, a biz guy in the traditional sense of like Wharton,
Mhm.
and all of that kind of business school and all of that. And it was a moment in my life where I really had some hard decisions to make. I have a daughter, and I was thinking about her future, and I was thinking certainly about my marriage, and a whole bunch of other things. And I went to Wall Street, and I became a stockbroker,
Mhm.
which
Yeah.
is the furthest thing on a lot of levels. I mean, maybe later we'll talk about the similarities, because it's people, and people are people no matter what they do.
Mhm.
They still act like people. Um, but it was as far removed from anything I was trained for, anything I went to school for, anything that I could possibly have enjoyed. And yet it became this thing that, not because of the finance involved in it, but because of a real freeing up and an opportunity to look at virtually everything far more broadly, that got
Yeah.
me re-involved in music, but in a different way that probably is far more suitable to where I am right now,
Mhm.
in an investment firm, working on real estate, a whole bunch of things that never, when I say working on real estate, like real estate development, commercial real estate development,
Yeah.
um, not building houses,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it really gave me a much wider perspective on how limitless things could be if you personally are open to that experience. And by the way, I don't want to sound like some self-help book or any of that bullshit. All I'm suggesting is that so much of what I did in my 20s and 30s and even 40s, I was so defining myself by my work that that lane, even though I thought it was like, oh my gosh, this lane is amazing. I've accomplished all the things. Well, what happens when you stop doing the things that you wanted to do when you were a kid? You're not a kid anymore. Now it's like, okay, I did the things I wanted to do. And, to one degree or another, I exceeded whatever my expectations might have been. I got to work with great bands and work with you, Ted, and all of that. But now what? Now what are you now what are you gonna do?
Yeah. I remember, I mean, obviously I was alive and well for lack of a better word, the collapse of the major labels
Yeah,
and the big studios and the big studio budgets, and
right.
everybody getting garage band and thinking they can make records in their garage. And I think we chatted about this, that it became democratized in a way it never had
Right.
before. If you were an artist in the 70s, 80s, whatever, and you wanted to make a competitive record, you were going to have to shell out a lot of money that you probably couldn't afford.
Sure.
And
And
that's
there were
what the
gatekeepers
labels.
and tastemakers that would either exclude you or include you, and all of that. And that the playing field still has completely is completely level. You
Yeah,
know.
and I remember you talking about that, and I remember you telling me that this was going to be the next chapter for you.
Yeah.
And I learned from that. You became extremely successful in a different career, but also have sort of found your way back,
Yeah.
in lots of new and exciting ways in music.
Right.
And that, to me, that's sort of what I was saying about, you know you can, if you're stuck in a rut, whatever it is you're doing,
Mhm.
you know y- you can create opportunities for yourself.
Absolutely.
And I think it takes a
Absolutely.
little introspection, and it takes a little thinking and planning, and maybe taking a risk,
Well,
and
I
saying,
think,
what,
yeah, and I
this
think
is
it's,
not, I'm
look,
not happy doing this. I want to do something else.
absolutely, Ted. The I didn't have a plan for any of this, which is maybe counterintuitive to everything we're talking about. I didn't have a specific plan, but my expectation was that if I didn't say no to anything, that something good would happen. You know what I mean? Now, that may be the stupidest thing that anybody ever says on any of your podcasts, but if you act, I felt as if, especially before I had a kid, I had a lot of time. I had a lot of time. I have a very understanding wife, and I don't get a lot of pressure, because my track record with her is pretty good. But I just figured if I try enough different things, then something good can happen. Something good can happen. Um, that's also not to say that even in this moment, when we get off this podcast, there are 6 challenges that I have to deal with in a number of different
Sure.
businesses that I have, that are immediate phone calls when we wrap up, whenever we're done. That
Yeah.
exists. But to somebody who felt like they were painted into a corner or stuck in a life or a lifestyle, you know, I'm not the therapist to tell you how to get out of that, but other than to say, don't be risk adverse. The
Hmm.
worst that something can happen is that you fail. You obviously don't want to risk your life savings on something that's really stupid. You don't want to
Hmm.
do that. But if it's a time commitment and the opportunity to learn something new, generally speaking, with the exception of that record that I took knowing that I shouldn't have done it,
Right.
um, I'll say yes to many, many, many different kinds of things, whether I have deep experience in them or not, because I just want to learn, and I think I bring enough to the game where people don't feel as if they're paying for my learning curve, but there's still a component to I don't know everything. I'm a voracious learner. It doesn't mean I'm a voracious reader or I'm a voracious mathematician or I'm any of these skilled things that, some people look at as a hiccup for moving forward in their lives. All it really is okay, I trust myself to know that the more people I interact with, it's that same wanting to be a part of different teams all the time, that I'm going to get some of those blanks filled in for me. And I am going to learn something new. And even if this venture or this interaction or this dinner or whatever it is that I might do, I'm going to walk away with something that is a learning experience for me. And
Hmm.
I have proven this out to myself year after year after year after year. Somebody that I went out to dinner with that I had no commonality, there was no synergy for our businesses. 3 years later, wind up becoming something. Something happens. Good stuff
Hmm.
can happen that way.
Yeah.